Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I received a request from two very important leaders of Omenana defenders to talk about the Igbos and God. I accepted the request, and I want to use this opportunity to thank these elders that feel that I am qualified to discuss this subject for the good of our people. Listeners, panelists, I call you panelists as long as you follow this question of the Igbos and the Omenana. This is a relatively easy subject to resolve. We are Omenana. By the way, if you are following me for the first time today, Omenana is Igbo culture and religion, where it stands on the question of the Igbos' understanding of monotheism, polytheism, henotheism, atheism, and the other theisms, is where the Igbos stand on the question of kingship, or what we also call monarchy. The Igbos traditionally do not have kings, human kings. The Igbos believe that only the Supreme Being is their king. Igbos have about 900 communities that we call Obodo. All of them were presided over by their elders, who were more or less first among equals. This was essentially what knocked the Igbo heads and the British heads together. The Igbos could not be administered by the British, while the British could administer the empires. So they tried to install kings over the Igbos, and the Igbos fought them for 33 years. Likewise, the Igbos know about a supreme being whom the Igbos call Chiukwu. The Igbos do not have a word for gods that are other than this supreme being. That is why you don't find the word Chinta or Chiobere in the Igbo language. So, as far as Omenana is concerned, the Igbos that established the way of life called Omenana had no notion. They did not imagine that gods other than the Supreme Being can exist. By the way, I am not saying that a contemporary Igbo cannot become an idolater. A contemporary Igbo can look at this telephone and say, "This is my God." A contemporary Igbo imagined that Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, the most prominent Igbo in modern times, found what was called the Mame water, put it in a bottle. Millions believed it. I know well-educated Igbos that believed that this man bottled up the Mame water in a bottle. So this is all about imagination. Likewise, a contemporary Igbo can imagine that the sun, the moon, the stars, and whatever became his gods. I come from an Igbo community. I was born in one. I am a researcher that does not rest. What this Igbo can call his gods, I call some of them my ancestors. A typical person from my community will refer to Akpu, who was very clear in the history of my community as our most important ancestor, most important recent ancestor. Some people from my community refer to him as a god. Their ignorance does not explain Igbo culture. Now, I will get back to the roots of Igbo culture. One thing that is inescapable is that Igbo people came from Israel. And Igbo can reject this and virtually commit suicide rejecting it, but it doesn't change the facts. While going through the trilogy produced by Professor Nwala, the chairman of Ali Igbo Development Foundation, I saw the entry of Professor Nwezigwe. Professor Nwezigwe wrote that it cannot be ignored, that the fact that the Igbos came from Israel cannot be ignored. I know he ignored it for years, but he realized that it can no longer be ignored because it is the only history of the Igbos that makes sense. The others are what the Igbos call Ajambene. Another professor who contributed to the discussion had the same conclusion, even though he was talking about ancient, pre-modern times or prehistorical times, but he still landed on the side that this idea that the Igbos came from Israel makes sense completely, even though he was using terms that he shouldn't use, which shows that he's simply confused. He doesn't have access to the most modern, most up-to-date research. Now, how do the Hebrews conceive God? I will start from how did humans even conceive God? The earliest humans whom the Hebrew Bible presented to us as Adam and Eve knew about only one supreme being. Only one being was superior to human beings. Only one. The being that Igbos called Chukwu, that was the only being that the first humans whom we knew as Adam and Eve understood to be God. But when man began to fall, man began to think that this tree, that house, that person, all sorts of nonsense, we are gods. God pulled mankind right back to the right path by selecting a man who was born at Uru of the Chaldeans. By the way, I was born at Uru in Ozobo. Abraham, who was initially called Abram, and redirected him back to where man is supposed to be, recognition of only one God. So, this man transmitted this to his descendants. The contemporary Igbo, the contemporary Jew, the contemporary Samaritan, the contemporary Karaite can become an idolater. Many Igbos are idolaters, but they are not idolaters because they are taking it from Omenana. If they are practicing Omenana, they won't be idolaters. They are hacking, they are borrowing from other strange traditions and becoming idolaters. If you want to understand Omenana, attach yourselves to Omenana defenders, and we will give you the criteria for learning Omenana. You have to first of all have a good formal education, a very strong degree, and then we can talk. I was talking to one Patrick Ugwani when I was living in Abuja. Patrick Ugwani has a master's degree in religious studies from the famous University of Nigeria and Nsukka. I came to Patrick on one occasion and said, Patrick, the Israelite people whom we belong to are a very small people. How come all the important traditions in the world, or most of the important traditions in the world, want to have linkages to the Israelite tradition? Patrick thought for a minute and said, Remy, I believe that those people came very close to, near the supreme being. I said, what? How? He said that while their peers, while all their contemporaries, we are thinking of gods you can see, they conceived of a God you cannot see. This is an educated man. And this is where we want to get the Igbos back to. We want to get every Igbo back to critical thinking. Thank you, everybody.